Chapter 7. Loaded down with groceries and odds and ends I'd picked up here and there, I returned to my car. I placed the bundles on the seat beside me, paid the attendant, and drove out of the parking place. The streets seemed unusually deserted, automobiles few and pedestrians scarcer. I allowed my thoughts to ramble as I drove. Now that you were well on the road to recovery, now that most of the little details of our daily living had been taken care of, I could devote my time to finding out who the owners of this planet were, whether or not they were responsible for the rapaciousness of this race, whether or not this planet would be safe without them, and whether the inhabitants themselves constituted a menace to the Union. A great task, but I had the time in which to do it. I was startled by a voice. "You can kill me, but I'd rather you didn't." I glanced over my shoulder to see a woman, the same one I had caught a glimpse of that morning. She appeared young and rather attractive, and was obviously horrified. What at first glance seemed to be a hat was, in actuality, a metal mesh helmet attached to a small battery-powered oscillator. The helmet prevented me from detecting her thoughts without an effort. It didn't present a total barrier, merely camouflage. I disdained to read her mind. "I will not kill you," I said. "I have no reason to kill you." This seemed to lessen her terror somewhat. "Perhaps this is stupid," she began, "but we felt someone had to contact you." She looked at me with large, timid eyes. I drew the car to a stop and turned to face her direction. "Suppose you come up here so I won't have to turn my head to watch you. I suspect that if I don't keep my eye on the roadway, this crude machine will kill us both." As she stepped out of the car, I transferred my packages and bundles to the floor behind. She closed the door after sliding into the seat, and I noted she was quite small and radiated an atmosphere of harmlessness. This was obviously the intention of those who had sent her, knowing she would put anyone at ease. It would also be a risk to probe her mind, for several others might be attuned to hers and could thereby attack me if I opened my guard. "You don't trust me, do you?" she asked as the car began again. "Should I?" "I suppose not," she sighed. We drove in silence a little further. I allowed the automobile to follow the general stream of traffic, neither attempting to avoid nor achieve proximity to our dwelling. Presently, she turned to me with a pathetic expression on her face. "Is there any way you can know I am a friend?" "I'll find out in time," I answered. "I don't intend to take risks finding out, but all things become clear if you wait long enough." "Aren't you going to ask me any questions?" "If you intend to tell me anything, you will, unasked," I pointed out. "If you do not intend to tell me, then no question will cause you to. I will not be stupid and attempt to probe your mind." "Then you can read minds," she exclaimed excitedly. "Of course, you know that, or your superiors do. Otherwise, you'd not be wearing that contraption of yours." "Would it help if I took it off?" "No." "Oh dear, I don't know what to do," she said, vexed. "They said once I found you, well, I sort of expected everything would be all right." "Who do you, or they, think I am? And who is they?" I decided at this point to ask the obvious question. This should lend the impression that I was easily swayed from previous judgment. "Well, you're not a man, are you?" I laughed. "What is a man?" "Well, an inhabitant of this planet." I pointed to a dog trotting along the sidewalk. There's an inhabitant of this planet, therefore it is a man, by your definition. A man is, he has two arms and two legs. Well, like, I was gonna say you, but I guess I mean me. If you're a man, I said, then I am not. She laughed then, a very pleasant laugh. I'm all confused. I must sound like a rattlebrain. This was true, however, I smiled deprecatingly, as though she were intelligent in my eyes. Well, perhaps if I put it this way, she said, I want to know what there is about you that makes you different. Young lady, I said patiently, you, Gloria Hayes, she interrupted. Gloria Hayes, I said in the same tone of voice. You're asking me for information. Someone else asked me for information this morning, and I gave it to them. However, I knew why they wanted the information, who and what they were, and other details necessary to cause me to decide as I did. You, if you will pardon the expression, will have to come clean. She laughed again. That's just it. I don't know what to say. I don't know whether I'm making a fool out of myself, although I probably am. I don't know whether you are what you seem to be, or whether you will have me put in an asylum if I try to explain. That is, suppose you were just an ordinary man like those out there. She pointed to some people. I was slightly shocked by her reference to asylum. The implications were too barbaric for words. To confine those who were mentally ill was even worse than confining those who violated customs and arbitrary laws. Suddenly, I realized that this was my cue to react. Do you mean that they confine someone because of illness? Oh, you are, she said gleefully. You really aren't from the earth, are you? No one could be so naive, I decided. She was attempting to appear so to disarm me, and overdoing it a bit. Or was I supposed to discover that she was overdoing it? It was a ticklish problem. Very well, I admit it, I said. I am an alien. I come from a far planet. I could see no harm in admitting the obvious. Her attitude changed immediately. She sat in silence, studying her hands, a grave, resigned look on her face. At length, I said, Would you care for some food? She nodded. I turned toward a small restaurant which I detected nearby, and at that moment Almondo interrupted my thoughts. Do you know what's behind all this? I think so, but I'll make sure. Can I help in any way? This should be fairly easy. Watch me, however. I will, Almondo concluded. I drew the car to the curb, climbed out, then helped the young lady out in the best tradition. We entered the restaurant in silence, and I guided her toward a table before the windows which overlooked the ocean. A waitress took our orders almost at once. We sat in uncomfortable silence, which she relieved by looking out of the window. I studied her carefully. She was a light, fragile creature, and definitely far more intelligent than I had first thought. I noticed that her eyes, moving across the scene before her, betrayed lightning-quick reactions. Would you care for a drink? I suggested. She looked startled. Why, no, I don't think so, thank you. I excused myself then, went over to a small counter and purchased some cigarettes. What are you doing? Almondo asked. You'll poison yourself. Patience, patience, friend. I only plan to light it. I shall absorb as little poison as possible. What of your food? That gadget the Watcher gave you is not going to eliminate all the poison. Have you learned nothing? Ah, so even you do not suspect what I'm doing? Your thoughts have been masked quite effectively, Almondo answered. You do know what you're doing? It's not a touch of star madness? What is star madness? I asked. My dear Bach, Almondo replied patiently, men who take to space, particularly if they're isolated from the women of our race, become subject to biological urges. Our race does reproduce, you know. That's a self-evident fact. However, I'm here to uncover information. She just happens to be female. That is a bad sign, Almondo flashed. You're angry. I'm not angry, I flared. I dislike being misunderstood. I understand, Almondo replied, unconvincingly. During this short exchange, I had purchased the cigarettes and had walked back to the table. I opened the package, drew one out, and lit it. Then I seated myself. The young lady across from me studied me coldly for a moment, her eyes darting to the cigarette several times. Then her face colored. You're an imposter, she hissed. I am not, I replied, calmly. You wouldn't be holding that poisonous thing if you belonged to another world. She rose, as if to leave. This was obviously the time to take a chance. My mind reached out and touched her neural centers, forced her muscles to obey against her will. She sank back into the chair, smiling, inwardly struggling against my rather light grasp. I wanted her to remember this. Her delicate hand reached out and took the cigarette from my fingers. She took a tiny puff from it, then burst out coughing violently. I know you are not a native of this planet, I said. She sat across from me, furious. Monster, she breathed. I am sorry, I said sincerely. I was not going to reveal anything to you until you told me the truth. I didn't dare probe your mind for fear it might be a trap. She sobered suddenly. Oh, and I was testing you to see if you were genuine. But how could it be a trap? There's no one else. She put her hand over her mouth. Do you mean that you're alone on this planet? I asked incredulously. She nodded, stricken. I smiled. You know, I wonder if there are any real natives. You mean there are others like you and me? Quite a number, I murmured. What are they doing? No, let's not start that, I said. You tell me about yourself. She sighed. There isn't much to tell. I came on a ship. We were emigrating, and that's not very explicit, I broke in. Our food chose that inopportune moment to arrive. I shoved most of the nauseating stuff to one side, selecting a few stalks of celery. Oh dear, the girl moaned. Things are so confused. Oh, that seems obvious. Perhaps I'd better ask questions. To begin, where do you come from? It's a long ways away, she said. I don't know what the name of it is here. I only know that things were always difficult. It was always cold. It was a very small sun and very nearly dead. From all our planets, some were selected to leave to find a new home. We sailed a long time, perhaps 2 of this planet's years. Then our captain approached this system. Do you come from without or within? What do you mean? She asked. From the rim of the universe? Yes, we were coming inward. I know that, she replied. Did you crash? She hesitated. Yes. That's untrue. Suddenly, I read the answer in her mind. On her own world, which I could not identify, she was a slave. The ruling race was not manlike. She was deathly afraid that I would return her, and ever more terrified that I would leave her here. She was hoping to win my sympathies and stay with me wherever I might go. She began haltingly then to explain. She had sneaked aboard this transport and had in some strange way escaped detection and death. Her masters were reptilian, rather small, being about 3 feet in height, and gifted with the ability to change their skin color to match any background. She had stolen a life craft, and true enough, she had crashed. Fortunately, her masters were far more fragile than she, so their crafts were designed with an eye towards safety. Consequently, she had emerged alive. The remains of her ship were south of us about 300 miles. I had no doubts when she had finished that this was the truth. "You will help me, won't you?" she begged. I saw that she was close to hysterics. "Yes, I'll help you," I said calmly. "But let's go ride some more. I wish to think." I rose and guided her toward the door. I paid the check quickly, hoping to get her to the automobile before she broke down. I succeeded, for I had just closed the door on my side when she burst into tears. "I've been so alone," she sobbed. "This is an awful place. Almost worse than home." I gave her a handkerchief and started the car. She covered her face, continuing to sob for some time. When she finally subsided, she said, "I'm sorry I made such a spectacle out of myself." "It's all right," I replied. "It did you a world of good, I've no doubt." We were driving slowly beside the ocean. The scenery seemed to help calm her nerves, and when she at last seemed relaxed, I asked, "How did you find me?" "Oh, I don't know," she answered. "Yesterday you were in a restaurant when I was, and I sort of felt your thoughts." She sighed. "You see, I know that if there were other people like me, people from other planets, other stars, well, it was possible that you might be one." Yes. "I was desperate," she admitted. "I was ready to end my life. From the time I arrived here, I've had nothing but trouble. You see, I couldn't speak the language. I had no money. I was practically in rags, and I didn't know what to do or where to go. I was walking along the highway that night, the night after I crashed, and some men in uniforms picked me up in a car, and they took me to a police station. The next day, some doctors examined me, and I was put in an insane asylum. They thought I was suffering from amnesia." I looked at her, puzzled. "You see," she said quickly, "I couldn't tell them who I was or where I came from. The words I spoke were so much gibberish to them. I couldn't make myself understood." I nodded. "Well, doctors examined me, asked questions, made tests, did all sorts of things. Every other day or so, people would come to see me. I guess lots of people disappear or get lost on this planet because they all thought I might be someone they were looking for. All this time, I was doing my best to learn the language, and they let me have books to read, thinking it might help me to remember something." She laughed then, although I could see nothing to laugh about. "That's when I got the idea." "Idea?" "Yes," she said. "I wanted to get away from there, and I knew no one would recognize me as belonging to their family, so I decided the only thing to do was to suddenly remember the past, make one up." She sighed. "It's hard to do. I realized they'd check on anything I said, so I studied books, maps, newspapers, everything they would let me have so I wouldn't make a mistake." "It doesn't seem to me it would be possible," I said, "under the circumstances. Surely they insisted on some tangible evidence, some proof of your story." She looked out the window for a moment, seemingly trying to decide something in her mind. I waited patiently, knowing that she would eventually continue, sympathizing a trifle, yet careful to weigh every word. "You won't believe what happened," she said slowly, still gazing out the window. "I'm willing to listen," I said. "Isn't it for me to decide whether it's believable or not?" She nodded and stopped, looking out the window. "Well, I worked out a background, a life for myself. I made up details about my childhood from things I had read in books, and, well, of course, my name, and my parents were dead, and I had no family, and everything like that. When I was sure that I could answer any questions they might ask, I picked out a convenient time when I would remember all this." "Did you actually think it would work?" I asked. I don't know," she replied. "I felt it was the only hope I had. But when it came time to remember, I got scared. I was so frightened, I forgot everything. At least, almost everything. I got started all right. Two of the doctors were in my room, and they jumped when I said I'd remembered something. From then on, I just rattled. I can't tell you now most of what I said, but I know it wasn't anything I'd planned. The words just seemed to roll out like it was someone else talking, not me. I was too terrified at the time to even think." "Hmm," I murmured. I don't know how long I talked. The doctors wrote down things in their notebooks, and when I finally stopped, I was shaking so hard they made me lie down. They said I was excited and upset and should rest for a while. They returned not long after that, smiling, and they called me Gloria Hayes. That's who I said I was, but it wasn't the name I had decided on. They had checked on other things I'd said and found them true. I'd been working at a candy factory, and had suddenly disappeared, and I even fit the description. There was no doubt in the doctors' minds that I was Gloria Hayes, and the next day, they said I could leave. They even loaned me some money so that I could get along until I got a job. The real Gloria Hayes must be around somewhere because I know it isn't me. I know you don't believe me, but I swear it's true." "I haven't said I don't believe you," I replied. She sighed. "I know, it's just a feeling I have." She paused. "If you don't believe me, no one will." I saw tears coming to her eyes again. "This world is too unbearably terrible to live in," she said. "I've been so afraid. Almost everyone is bigger than I am. Everything is so big, so noisy, and I haven't any friends. For some reason, people feel uncomfortable around me. I'd just about given up, and then I saw you on the street again today with those policemen. I was able to catch what you were thinking. You thought about your car just as you were leaving, and that's when I decided to. She broke off. "I take it that you're a telepath, then?" "Yes, but I'm not very good. I guess I'm better than most on this world. Usually I only receive fleeting images, but lately I've been able to clarify them a little. I was able to pick up your thoughts easily." "I see," I said. "What about that thing you have on?" "Does it work?" she asked. "It does, to a certain extent." I thought it might." "You have some technical ability, then," I said. "Yes, a little," she answered. "The masters let me do things. That was my job the day I sneaked aboard the ship, checking the communications equipment." "Tell me," I said, "about the day you stowed away. Did the idea just strike you suddenly?" She sat up, startled. "Yes, but how did you know?" "Merely guessing," I replied. "You see, I'm a student of other cultures and environments." "Oh." We drove on in silence. Bit by bit, I had pieced things together. This was obviously the second attempt and a surprisingly unoriginal one. In a few minutes, as our car met heavy traffic, she would reach over and jerk the wheel, and we would presumably be killed. The oncoming driver would perhaps turn to meet us. I waited, knowing that this would be someone's last attempt on my life. When the opportunity seemed at hand, I turned my head as if looking at the ocean, dropping one hand to my lap and holding the wheel lightly in my fingers. She lunged quite suddenly, but her strength proved no greater than I had estimated. I dodged the other car with only a slight distance to spare. Somewhere, where I could not perceive, an alien, slimy mind writhed in my grasp. Its struggles grew less and less, and then it died. "That," I said, "tips our hand." She was white-faced and shaking. "I didn't mean to do it," she gasped. "I couldn't help myself." "I know," I replied. "You can take off your little helmet now." Did you do it?" she asked, dumbfounded. "No," I said. "It was a newly acquired friend. May he rest in peace." She turned a quizzical eye toward me as she untangled the wire netting from her hair. When it was at last laying on the seat beside me, I noticed that the power supply was a remodeled hearing aid. I snapped it open and removed the batteries. Is there something wrong with it?" she asked. I smiled. "This little device is attuned to someone who no longer has any use for it. You see, you only escaped for a short time." I don't understand." "Neither do I, completely. However, if you'll lean back and relax, I will attempt to set things right." She complied quite willingly, and I quickly put her into a deep trance. Almondo's thought cut in coldly. "I suppose you think— No, you cannot possibly think." "What do you mean?" "Well, observe the facts," Almondo flashed, exasperated. "We have an unknown enemy whose agent you're transporting around the countryside. You fully think you can remove her from their control, yet you have no idea who or what they are." Almondo paused. "Star madness." "Don't be absurd," I thought, coldly. "From her, I shall learn who and what they are, and will deal with them when it becomes necessary." "I've given you my opinion," Almondo replied acidly. "However, I will help you." He appeared to be resigned to his doom. I ignored him for the moment and concentrated on the girl. It was easy to locate the threads which tied her to an unseen ruler. I erased these memory patterns. I then found several key words and phrases. These I blocked. She could no longer be caught on the hook of a mere word. I probed further and discovered an interesting fact. Her former masters had deliberately urged her to escape, and unknown to her, was traded to the owners of this planet. For what, I could not imagine. It became clear from other items that the reptilian masters of this girl's world traded with the unknown rulers of this one. What comprised this commerce was unknown, but from my experience, I knew that reptile races did not enter into commerce with warm-blooded oxygen breathers. For that matter, they had few dealings with even the silicon creatures who were among the most recent additions to the Union. I knew of only two cold-blooded races, both of which remained as tiny islands engulfed by the Union. Gloria's former masters were of no race that I knew of, but then, the universe is a vast place. It hinted to my mind that the owners of this planet were probably reptiles also, or a related type. There were other bits of information in Gloria's mind, some of it unrelated, some of it meaningless. I decided to think of her as Gloria, since her real name was difficult to pronounce. When I'd finished my probing, I turned the automobile around and began to drive leisurely back toward town. "What do you propose to do now?" Almondo asked. "I'm coming home," I replied. "Are you bringing her?" "Is there any reason why I shouldn't? After all, she may prove valuable." "To whom? Certainly not to me." "Almondo, my friend," I telepathed, "this female is a creature of another race, an alien. I have no further interest in her than I would in any other living creature under the same circumstances." "Undoubtedly," Almondo agreed. "If she were one of those furred glonics who have 3 eyes and an unpleasant smell, among other endearing features, why, her head would be leaning against your shoulder, and you would be driving peacefully along, as smugly satisfied with yourself as you are now. I might add, to my mind, she's a member of the same race as ours, the natives of this planet, and the inhabitants of 500,000 more planets. This particular genus is well represented, you know." "Are you trying to tell me that I'm bringing this creature home at the risk of our lives for purely personal reasons?" "That's not my meaning at all," Almondo replied. "I merely wish that you would stop trying to deceive both yourself and me. You have perfectly valid reasons for your actions, but there are other reasons also, chief among which is your far from dead biological urge." I thought this over for a moment. I was formulating a reply when Almondo flashed, "Someone's at the door. Can you guide me a bit?" I sharpened my attention and slowed the automobile at the same time. I didn't obtain visual images, for they would have been confusing. I heard the door open and a voice say, "I have merchandise to be delivered here?" "Set it inside the door," Almondo said in my direction. I noted the number of bundles and packages as they came in, Almondo giving me a brief description of each. "Do not open any of them," I said. "There's one too many. Above all, do not probe them mentally." "Shall I destroy them?" "That might be unwise," I replied. "Very well," Almondo telepathed, unconcerned. "I have a weapon with me anyway." "What?" The concept was not too clear in my mind as to what he meant. The image in my mind showed a pistol-like contrivance of some unknown metal. The concept that followed was horrifying. There was a tiny chamber wherein an atomic fuel was disintegrated, the products of the disintegration emerging from the muzzle with great violence and at a tremendous temperature. "A souvenir," Almondo thought, "but I think it's workable." I rather hoped it was not, but made no reply. As I began to speed the automobile, the girl beside me sat up. "Oh," she said, looking about. "For a moment, I forgot where I was." "How do you feel now?" I asked. She sat thinking for a moment. "For the first time in my life, I feel at peace," she said slowly. "I'm not confused anymore. What was the matter with me?" "Nothing of importance," I replied. "You were under mental control, but I've taken care of it." She sighed. "That was the most confusing part of all. I knew I was, but I couldn't tell you. I tried, but I couldn't even think about it. I did my best to get some meaning across so you'd know." "You succeeded admirably," I said. She smiled, a very pretty smile, I thought. "Why are we in such a hurry?" "It saves time," I replied, grinning. I swung around a corner, the car lurching heavily, then slowed. Our street was not far ahead. In a more leisurely fashion, I turned the next corner and then turned into our driveway. I climbed out, opened the back door, and fished for the groceries I'd purchased. Gloria picked up the rest of the things, and together we walked up to the front door.